There is something strange about Greek myths. Most ancient civilizations disappeared into history. Their cities became ruins. Their languages faded. Their gods lost their worshippers. And yet somehow, the stories survived. Not just in books, not just in classrooms, not just in museums, but inside people. We still talk about narcissism. We still describe impossible labor as Sisyphean. We still speak about having an Achilles heel. We still recognize the danger of flying too close to the sun. Thousands of years later, these stories still feel familiar. Not because modern people are obsessed with the past, but because the ancient Greeks understood something about human nature that never disappeared. They understood pride, desire, fear, ambition, jealousy, love, revenge, the hunger for meaning, the terror of mortality. Greek myths were never really about monsters. They were about people. And that may be why they survived, because beneath the gods, the prophecies, and the impossible creatures, these stories were observing the same human patterns we still live through today. The Greeks looked at human beings honestly, sometimes brutally honestly. And unlike the modern world, they rarely pretended that people were naturally rational, peaceful, or good. They saw humanity as conflicted, powerful and fragile at the same time, capable of greatness, capable of destruction. Their myths were not fantasies designed to help people escape reality. They were mirrors, and in many ways, they still are. The modern world often treats mythology as entertainment, as fiction, as primitive stories invented by ancient people trying to explain storms and earthquakes. But that explanation is incomplete, because Greek myths survived for a different reason. They survived because they understood emotional reality. Long before psychology existed, long before neuroscience, long before modern philosophy tried to categorize human behavior, the Greeks were already turning human emotion into story. They understood that people are not guided by logic alone. People sabotage themselves, destroy what they love, become consumed by pride, chase things they know will not satisfy them. People become blinded by power, betray each other out of envy, suffer from desires they cannot control. And instead of pretending otherwise, the Greeks built entire myths around these truths. Take the story of Icarus, a story most people hear as children. A boy escapes imprisonment using wings made of feathers and wax. His father warns him not to fly too high. But intoxicated by freedom and ambition, Icarus ignores the warning. He rises higher and higher until the sun melts the wax. Then he falls into the sea. For thousands of years, people have repeated this story because it captures something timeless. Not just arrogance, but the dangerous intoxication of success. Human beings often believe limits no longer apply to them once they begin rising. The higher people climb, the more invincible they can start to feel. History repeats this pattern constantly. Empires, kings, politicians, celebrities, businesses, athletes, ordinary people. Again and again, success transforms into overconfidence, and overconfidence transforms into collapse. The Greeks saw this pattern everywhere. They had a word for it: hubris, excessive pride. The belief that human beings could rise above their natural limits. And in Greek mythology, hubris almost always leads to destruction. Not because the gods were simply cruel, but because the Greeks believed pride itself distorts perception. Once people begin worshipping themselves, they stop seeing reality clearly. That idea still feels modern, because it is modern. Human nature changed far less than technology did. The Greeks also understood another uncomfortable truth. People often want things that destroy them. The modern world likes to believe that freedom means unlimited desire, that happiness comes from pursuing whatever we want. But Greek myths repeatedly warned that human desire can become endless, insatiable, self-destructive. King Midas is one example, a man who wished for the power to turn everything he touched into gold. At first, the gift felt miraculous, but eventually he realized he could no longer eat, no longer hold the people he loved, no longer live normally. The thing he desired became the thing that destroyed him. And that story still exists because modern people continue making the same mistake. People chase wealth until they lose peace, chase status until they lose identity, chase success until they lose relationships, chase attention until they no longer know who they are without it. The Greeks understood that human beings often imagine fulfillment as accumulation. More power, more admiration, more pleasure, more recognition. But many myths quietly suggest the same thing. There is no natural ending to desire. Without restraint, people can consume their entire lives chasing things that never truly satisfy them. And perhaps no Greek figure captures human suffering more clearly than Sisyphus, condemned to push a massive stone uphill forever, only for it to roll back down every single time. An endless cycle. No final victory, no completion, no escape. At first glance, the story feels hopeless, but the reason it survived is because it resembles ordinary life more than people want to admit. Many people wake up every day feeling trapped inside repetition. The same work, the same stress, the same fears, the same routines, the same disappointments, the same invisible uphill climb. And that is why philosophers continued returning to this myth for thousands of years. Because Sisyphus represents something universal, the human confrontation with struggle itself. The Greeks did not believe life was easy. They did not believe suffering could simply be eliminated. In many ways, they saw struggle as inseparable from existence. Even their greatest heroes suffered constantly. Odysseus spends years wandering across the sea trying to return home. Achilles becomes legendary but dies young. Prometheus is tortured eternally. Orpheus loses Eurydice just as he nearly rescues her. Victory never fully protects anyone from pain. That idea sharply contrasts with many modern fantasies. Today, people are often sold the illusion that suffering is abnormal, that life should eventually become permanently stable, permanently happy, permanently fulfilling. But Greek mythology repeatedly suggests something else. To live is to struggle, not because life is meaningless, but because existence itself contains tension, loss, mortality, uncertainty, desire, conflict. The Greeks did not run away from those realities. They built stories around them. And perhaps that honesty is why the myths still feel alive. The ancient Greeks also understood the terrifying power of fate. Modern people like to imagine themselves fully in control, independent, self-created. But Greek myths constantly challenge that illusion. Oedipus is one of the clearest examples. A prophecy declares that he will kill his father and marry his mother. Terrified, everyone involved tries to avoid the prophecy. And yet every attempt to escape fate slowly leads Oedipus directly toward it. The tragedy is not simply what happens. It is the realization that human beings often understand far less than they think they do. People believe they are acting freely, but many are driven by unconscious fears, patterns, traumas, blind spots, desires they barely understand. Even today, people repeat destructive cycles without realizing it. The same relationships, the same mistakes, the same emotional reactions, the same self-sabotage. The Greeks understood that human beings are not fully transparent to themselves. That idea feels surprisingly modern because modern psychology eventually rediscovered something similar. People are not entirely rational creatures. Much of human behavior emerges from hidden forces beneath conscious awareness. The Greeks expressed this through myth, and perhaps that is why their stories still feel psychologically real. But Greek myths were not only warnings, they were also deeply fascinated by human resilience. Odysseus survives not because he is the strongest man, but because he adapts. Again and again, he loses certainty, he loses safety, he loses control. He faces storms, shipwrecks, temptation, isolation, war, monsters, humiliation, and yet he continues moving forward. Not perfectly, not heroically in every moment, but persistently. That is what makes Odysseus feel modern. He is not an invincible superhero. He is exhausted, clever, traumatized, restless, human. And perhaps that is why people still connect with him. Because modern life often feels like wandering through uncertainty, trying to return to something stable, trying to preserve identity while constantly adapting, trying to survive psychologically inside chaos. The Greeks understood that endurance itself can become heroic, not just victory, and that may be one of the deepest reasons these myths survived. They speak to emotional experiences that remain fundamentally human. Technology changed, governments changed, religions changed, the world changed. But people still fear rejection, still crave recognition, still struggle with temptation, still compare themselves to others, still wrestle with mortality, still search for meaning, still break under pride, still suffer from envy, still long for home. The setting changed, the psychology did not. That is why Greek myths continue resurfacing, in films, in literature, in psychology, in politics, in modern language, in art, in philosophy. The myths never truly disappeared, because the human patterns inside them never disappeared. Even modern celebrity culture often resembles Greek tragedy. Public worship, pride, rise, collapse, humiliation, exile. The same emotional architecture appears again and again. And perhaps the Greeks understood something many modern societies try to ignore. Human beings are not purely logical creatures. We are symbolic creatures. People need stories to understand themselves. Stories about suffering, ambition, temptation, mortality, identity. Stories that transform emotional chaos into something visible. Greek myths gave emotional shape to invisible human experiences. That is why they continue speaking across centuries. Not because people literally believe Zeus lives on Mount Olympus, but because the emotional truths underneath the myths still feel recognizable. And maybe that is what mythology really is. Not primitive science, not childish fantasy, but psychological memory. Ancient people observing human behavior carefully enough to turn it into symbolic story. The Greeks understood that beneath civilization, human beings remain unstable creatures, capable of wisdom, capable of self-destruction, capable of beauty, capable of cruelty. They understood that human beings constantly wrestle against themselves. And unlike many modern systems that promise easy answers, Greek mythology rarely offered permanent resolution. The heroes suffer, the wise make mistakes, the powerful fall, the innocent die, the proud collapse. Life remains uncertain, but inside that uncertainty, the Greeks searched for dignity, meaning, courage, restraint, self-knowledge, not perfection. And perhaps that is why these stories continue surviving in every generation. Because modern people still recognize themselves inside them. not literally, but emotionally. The monsters changed form. The labyrinths became psychological. The wars became economic, political, digital, emotional. But the deeper human struggle remained. People still become trapped by ego, still lose themselves chasing desire, still search for belonging, still fear death, still long for purpose, still wander. Greek myths never truly died because the human being they described never truly disappeared. And maybe that is the real power of mythology. Not that it tells us who the Greeks were, but that thousands of years later, it still tells us who we are. If you want to go deeper into these ideas, we recommend the book Mythos by Stephen Fry. It explores the deeper human truths hidden inside Greek mythology and the timeless patterns of pride, desire, suffering, ambition, fate, and human nature. You'll find a link to the book in the description and in the pinned comment. You can also explore more philosophy and psychology books through our bookshop page. If this resonated with you, consider subscribing for more videos like this. Leave a comment and share your experience. Thank you for watching.